Order the Health and Human Services and Aging Committee, Wednesday, February 19th, 2020, and a few minutes after 1. Can we have a roll call, please, Madam Clerk?
Calling the roll, Ms. Conwell.
Present.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Ms. Stevens.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, anyone signed in for public comment?
No, Madam Chair, no one is signed in.
Oh, get out. We're missing our Miss Lou. That's why we were looking. I'd like to make an approval of the minutes from the February 5th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and all in favor, say aye. Aye. We have two matters referred to the committee today, and then we have a presentation update regarding thriving communities. Madam Clerk, if you could please read the first item into the record.
Resolution number 2020-0049, making an award on requisition number 45365 to the Metro Health System in the amount not to exceed $1,067,000 for comprehensive medical services for families involved with the Division of Children and Family Services for the period January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Christine Alexander on behalf of the Department of Children and Family Services, seeking to enter into a contract with Metro Health Medical Center to provide trauma-informed, comprehensive medical services to children in the custody of DCFS and their caregivers. The comprehensive services include pre-placement physicals, or otherwise known as triage, 24/7, post-placement comprehensive medical assessments and referrals for specialty care, psychotropic medication consultation or second opinions for children in care who are prescribed medications for mental health or behavioral issues, toxicology services for caregivers, youth, and other members of the home, and linkages to healthcare providers for children aging out of foster care. The pre-placement physicals are provided by trauma-informed trained medical staff in a space outside the emergency room in order to minimize secondary trauma by children that are removed from their homes. Post-placement comprehensive medical assessments include referrals for specialty care, vision and hearing appointments within 30 days of a child being brought into custody of DCFS. These services were competitively procured through an RFP issued April 22nd, 2019, which closed on May 31st, 2019, and we received 5 total responses. Metro Health scored the highest and was recommended to provide all services. Metro Health has been providing comprehensive medical services to DCFS since 2014. The funding for this service is 100% state child protection allocation, and I do have staff here today both from DCFS and Metro Health if there are questions I cannot answer.
Yes. Sorry about that. Councilwoman Brown?
Thank you. Are these services, is this amount the same increase or decrease?
This is a slight increase since the last contract year. The last contract was $1,057,000. I'm sorry, $1,050,000. This year it's $1,067,000.
And you indicated there were 5 total responses and that Metro Health has been providing the service since 2014. Who are the 5 providers and how many children does this money cover?
So the 5 providers were Metro Health System, University Hospitals, Expressive Healthcare Academy, Aver Health, and Forensic Fluids Laboratories. In 2019, 3,039 children received triage services, and 765 children received post-placement comprehensive medical services, and 7 children received second opinion psychotropic medication consultation.
And I imagine that some of these numbers overlap, given the 7 with the second opinion, or is that incorrect?
I'm sorry, the last part of that?
So are any of these numbers overlapping? Because you indicated 3,039, 765, and then 7 with the second opinion.
That's a duplicated count,
okay.
correct.
All right, okay. And I think that answers my questions. Thank you very much. So with the final question, you indicated 2019, 3,039 children were served. Do we anticipate that number being higher?
That number has leveled off since last year. In January 2018 point in time, between January 2018, and January 2020, there was a 25% increase in triages, but they've leveled off since 2019.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilman Miller, you have one?
Ms. Brown was thorough and asked my questions.
Okay, I have a question, Ms. Alexander. Why did it take so long?
So the contract is basically primarily due to the broad and complex scope of work. The Metro Health system is a very large system. Our two law departments worked on refining the scope of work, refining the contract language and the boilerplate language, and that took several months. It's a very large bureaucracy.
Okay, and in terms of, I see there's a lot that Metro went back and forth on in regards to this contract. That occurred after they won the bid?
Correct.
Okay, so, now how did this, talk me through a little bit about the scoring of this type of contract? Because there was quite a few people that bid it.
Correct. Okay, so I don't have the scores in front of me, but kind of to sum it up, Expressive Health, Aver Health, and Forensic Fluids just opted to do the toxicology portion of the RFP. The RFP indicated that responders can do all or some of those services that we listed. Metro Health and universities both came in as proposing all of the comprehensive services. Metro Health, because of our background and our experience with Metro Health and the fact that they scored higher and came in at a competitive price, was awarded the contract.
Okay, so you looked at the other bidders that just wanted toxicology, and you priced that out, that it
The
was,
price was comparable. One of the toxicologies was out of town, so a lot of the timeframes were unable to be met because those results would have to be mailed back and forth.
and why would we add those words in the contract if we primarily want an agency or department to do it all?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. Why would we put that in the RFP, that they could do some or all, if primarily what we want is for all the services to be?
I think we wanted it to be an open and competitive process. The director at the time is not the director anymore, so I can't speak on their behalf.
Okay, so University Hospital, they perform all those services, so what happened in terms of the?
So the actual score, Metro Health did score higher. They wrote a better, more compelling response. Some of the other positives were they came in at a lower price. They're also located, their main campus services will be provided at the main campus. University Hospitals proposed providing services at Parma, which is less convenient for social workers and children, especially after hours.
I think the only part I didn't like is that what you stated is that they all bid it and were okay with the proposal that was put before them, and then it was all this back and forth. Did any of the children from the Department of Children and Family Services be neglected during this time at all?
They continue to provide services after January 1st. We have not paid or been billed for those services yet, but they have continued to provide the service.
Okay, and so we are happy with the children are being seen within a 2-hour window.
That is what they're striving for, correct. We don't track today whether that 2-hour window is being met, but they will be providing that information.
Okay, but it would be easy for us to track because doesn't a social worker accompany the kid to the?
Correct, yes,
Okay.
yes. We'll be doing that in 2020.
Okay. All right, and so this contract is just for a year?
Correct.
I see there was some,
There are 2 option years.
okay. So we will not, when you have 2 option years, which means we will not go send out another RFP?
Correct.
Okay. But does that allow other people to bid on it even though?
Not in the interim.
Not in the interim? Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to understand that. Looking at, I already know it's a second reading suspension. So can I have someone else please make a motion to move this forward, second reading suspension?
I will so move.
All right, been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Next item in the record, Madam Clerk.
Resolution number 2020-0050, making an award on requisition number 45811 to Bid Focus Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $536,560 for implementation, configuration, migration, operation, and maintenance of the Clarity Homeless Management Information System for the period March 10, 2020 to December 31st, 2024.
Good afternoon, Council, Committee. I've put together a handout for you that kind of talks through some of the points around what an HMIS or Homeless Management Information System is and why it's important in our community. You know, it's an electronic data collection system, and the Office of Homeless Services is designated as the Continuum of Care Systems Administrator for the Homeless Management Information System. And this means that the county has the responsibility of managing an electronic data system that every agency, including the county, is required to enter data in client-level data by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, every agency that receives funding through the HEART Act. And so if you turn your page on the handout, there's two slides that show like what data is being collected. And this is actually according to congressional statute. There are universal data elements which include name, date of birth, veteran status, housing status, program entry date, and then many others. And then there's some program-specific data elements which enable our community and the funder, HUD, to track specific funding grants by their program activity. And in addition, other data is collected through program-specific, including the client income, disabilities, health conditions, HIV/AIDS, et cetera. So then if you look at the next page, who is entering this data? So the Office of Homeless Services does not provide direct client services, so we do not enter data into HMIS. The data is entered through coordinated entry, starts the file, and then referrals to providers are made through HMIS, and then the provider agencies enter data relative to the services that they're providing to the client, and exit information as to where the client goes when they leave the services or shelter or housing that is being paid for through the HUD funding. So coordinated entry then starts the file. That's one of the functions is of coordinated entry, is to begin to document that someone is literally homeless, and that is an eligibility criteria for other housing and services. However, it's completely voluntary on the part of the client. If they do not want to have their data entered into HMIS, they can refuse, and that does not impact their ability to access shelter or housing services. So why is this important to us? Really, this is a system that helps us to hold program providers accountable for outcomes. We are able to look at the data and track trends. That helps us understand or begin to think about what's working, what's not working. We can identify from the demographics who is being served and maybe who's not getting services. And we can also begin to look at what services are costing within different programs. So on the next page, there's, and what I handed out to you, and I hope this isn't like too deep a dive, but some actual sort of data-generated reports from the system. And the first is what's called the Annual Performance Report. And this is, the one I gave you is for coordinated entry for 2019. And I've highlighted on the first page like the total number of people who actually entered in through coordinated entry and the number of children. These are unduplicated numbers. And just as a highlight, the youth-headed household, so that's a subcategory of the total. The tab I provided is for the demographic data, and that identifies male and female participants, the ages of people being served, and race. And these are all elements that are important to us to understand who is homeless and who are we serving. And then I also tabbed the outcome page, which is page 9, that shows where people are going when they leave coordinated entry in this case. So when they leave coordinated entry, most of them, which I've highlighted, are being referred to shelter. About 1,000 people were diverted or went other places through that first encounter with coordinated entry. So this report, like super detailed, every agency can run this report so that they can see in their own, in their own agency, how are they doing? Where are their exits? How long are people staying? Are they able to increase their income? How many people are survivors of domestic violence? Lots and lots of data. It also has sub-data on the APR about youth-headed households and youth and veterans and chronic homeless. So this is like the building block. The next report is this systems performance report. And this data software is, collected, and, I don't understand it myself, but at any rate, it's able to generate a systems report for our entire effort, our entire community effort. And HUD looks at 7 measures, and I've only provided 3. It's, again, like a deep dive into numbers, but I've highlighted the second performance measure, which is looking at the percentage of people who leave homelessness and then return. I mean, that's a pretty important measure. Like if you're getting people out, and we are, into housing, but they're coming back, what is that, what are we doing? Why is that happening? So I highlighted the row that, and this is also broken down, it's very detailed, so it's broken down by people who returned from shelter, or they returned from a safe haven, or they returned from permanent housing. And so the measure that we particularly are very focused on is if we've helped people get into permanent housing and they return. And so what this line suggests is that, and it's also longitudinal, so it not only looks at who returned, in 6 months, but it goes out to 2 years. And it shows that about 26% of folks return to shelter, return to homelessness after having been linked with permanent housing from our system. So, we could talk about that. I mean, it's very, interesting, and what does it mean, right? And, but this is the data that helps us as a community look at what we're doing and then ask about those things. But this report is then put up against a national standard. And, nationally, I don't want to say how do we compare, but the Department of Housing and Urban Development looks at how we compare, so what should this national standard be? I mean, this figure is, I don't really look at other communities as a matter of my daily activity, but so I don't know, but I would say that any return is not good. So, I mean, I think what this helps us to say is within the next year, we're going to try to reduce the number of returns by 5%, or, it enables each community to set goals and then to change their practice and then see if that has an impact on your performance. So, but the last report that I provided is this one-pager, and this is the other thing that we're able to do, and we do regularly with the homeless, with HMIS data, which is we make it available to other researchers and systems in our community to do data matches. And this particular report was done by the Center on Urban Poverty and Community Development at CASE, David Crampton. And he matched our HMIS data for youth against other data that they have at MSAS around child welfare involvement, juvenile justice involvement, adult justice involvement, TANF involvement, food assistance, and whether they were parents. And what this chart really demonstrates, what we sense and know, is that young people who have had child welfare involvement, who have had juvenile justice involvement, who have been in the adult justice system, these are 18 to 24-year-olds. This showed that 2 years prior to their coming into the shelter system, these are the percentages of their involvement with these systems. So that really is very striking and helps us, begin a conversation with these systems. Like, how do we collectively better serve our youth that that the homeless system ends up then becoming the houser of last resort. So currently we're involved with a data match with the jail system and mental health around the Stepping Up initiative to try to improve outcomes for people with mental health issues who are, stuck in the jail system. Just trying to have that data document what people know is a reality. Anyway, so we are very open to, participating in data matches because it's important for people to understand the intersections of our systems with housing instability, and then, collectively try to problem solve around those issues. So, is there any question about the data per se? And then I was just going to go into the details of the contract.
I had one on your last chart on your performance measurement model. Does the numbers have any indications why? So you spoke about the example, they exited from permanent housing and back into the shelter system. So what did we learn from that in terms of those that return to our system? I'm sure they're all over the place. Are the majority of them due to subsidy funding?
So to the chair, I think that I don't have an answer to that question. I mean, what I can tell you is that on a quarterly basis, now we are looking at, and this is again the usefulness of a coordinated entry system, so that when I come back into shelter, my name pops up in the HMIS data, and someone can see that I'd been in shelter, I received rapid rehousing in 2017, and here I am in 2020 and I'm back, and so that enables us to have a conversation. Someone could have a conversation with me and kind of drill down on kind of what happened there, right? Now that would be someone who it's taken 2 years for them to return. Maybe what we see on a daily basis is someone who went through rapid rehousing and is back in 6 months. That's an important piece of information for us to say, well, what are we doing here? Where did we fail on the rapid rehousing case management or in connecting people with income, with JFS resources, or what, right? And so those conversations take place weekly, trying to do better in terms of what we're offering and how can it be more useful to people.
Yeah, because I had a thought on that, but I'll let you continue. It'll come back. Oh, sorry about that. Councilwoman Stevens and then Brown. We'll roll our way down. How you doing?
So, this contract is for bid focus, correct?
Excuse me, Ms. Stevens, can you turn on your microphone, please?
Turn your mic on.
I'm sorry. Forget that. They provide data support. They're doing all the resource for the data support, correct?
Through the chair to Councilwoman Stevens, What we are submitting is a new contract award. Currently, we are working with a provider called WellSky, and what they provide to our community is a software product called Service Point. And so what we are proposing is to contract with a new vendor for a new software product called Clarity. So it's the software system that we're actually purchasing.
And this software system will be easier for people to enter data into? Is that the hope?
To the chair,
There's still, it appears to me that there's still manual input by individuals at the shelters or service providers, as opposed to your staff or BitFocus doing all the data entry. Is that correct?
to the chair, to Councilwoman Stevens, yes. We do not do data entry. The provider is not doing data entry. We provide training. The Allison Gill on my staff provides training to all the end users in the community. Each agency included in the contract is a license for each agency that's inputting the data. I'm not sure what you're asking.
So what I'm trying to find out is, is there a regular retraining? Because, sometimes people find, is this a better system than the one you've been using, and why?
To the chair, to Councilwoman Stevens, part of the process to identify a new provider included a presentation by the 3 competing bidders to end users in our community. So there were over 30 end users who participated in a hands-on demonstration of each of the products. And this one was the one that was the most highly rated as being user-friendly.
Does it allow you to provide interim data, or does it crank out a monthly report every month only, or just when you're required to generate a report to HUD?
To the chair, to Councilman Stevens, you are able to run a report whenever you want to. You could run, you set the parameters of the report. You could say, give me a report from January 1st to January 31st, or...
So if the committee wanted to see in 6 months what this
Excuse
was
me, Ms.
doing-
Stevens, can you scoot your microphone up a little bit? Thank you.
If the committee wanted to see a report 4 to 6 months from now, we could call you the week in advance so you wouldn't be shocked, or your new colleague, and we could see a report, an interim report that reflects more than one of these forms that were attached behind.
To the chair, to Councilman Stevens, so the annual performance report, you could see for any of our providers, any of the programs that within each provider agency, for any time period. And we could run that for you, or the agency itself could run it for you, but we'd be happy to do that. The system's performance report is run on an annual basis. I believe it can be run quarterly, but that's much more of a rolling up of all the data. We are required to provide the system's performance report to HUD on an annual basis.
So what makes this better than the system you had before?
To the chair, to Councilwoman Stevens. So getting into that, the Office of Homeless Services began the relationship with the current provider. We still have a contract with, it's called WellSky, and in 2003. and we'd had the same provider. The provider has changed ownership. It started out, it was a smaller company called Bowman Systems, and they provided this product to almost every continuum of care across the country. Like, they served like 75% of the COCs, of the 408 COCs. And then they were sold to a company called MetaWare, and then MetaWare was bought out by WellSky. So in each iteration, because they were being bought by these companies that have like a much broader data, like product world. You know, I believe that the focus on the HMIS product wasn't as elevated, you know. And so we were, you know, 16 years into a product, you know, we were due for an RFP. And so we were really looking for a product that was reliable, that had very good technical support, that was user-friendly, that the community wanted to see. And so we went through that RFP process, and BitFocus came out on top on all the measures that our community had developed.
Were there some core measures for performance that you were looking at? Better customer service than you had? Access to technical assistance
Yes.
that you hadn't received before?
Yes,
Examples?
exactly. And I've noted those, I think, but yes, so the idea was our local review team included people from the county's IT staff, contracting, and the Office of Homeless Services. You know, the local IT really, you know, did a good analysis of the product, of all the products that were submitted. Like I said, we included a review by community users as part of the decision-making process. And yes, so we considered all those things, and you know, BitFocus, we believe, will provide a much better product and a higher quality of service, higher usability, better data analytics, which is something that our current software system is sorely lacking.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is brief. I just wanted to ask if you could explain the letters SO as it relates to the report, and maybe just a brief description of the differences between transitional housing, safe housing, et cetera.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. To the Chair, to Councilman Brown. So SO stands for Street Outreach, and so and then ES is Emergency Shelter. TH stands for Transitional Housing, and in our community, the only transitional housing that we still have is provided through the VA. It's called Grant and Per Diem program, and we have 108 units of grant and per diem housing that is supported through 6 different providers. And then SH is actually what's called Safe Haven, and we have I think like 12 units of Safe Haven housing. And Safe Haven was the precursor to permanent supportive housing. It was like a very low threshold, low barrier housing for people who are very chronically homeless with severe mental illness. Yeah, and then the last is permanent housing. And so that includes rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
I'd like the record to reflect and recognize Councilman Jones is in attendance. Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, Director, I'm getting the impression that the requirement of having an HMIS system is not a new requirement at HUD. Is that correct?
To the Chair, to Councilman Miller, that is correct.
And how does the cost of this new contract compare with the previous contract?
To the Chair, to Councilman Miller, since probably 2010 or so, the levy has supported HMIS, the HMIS contract, at the level of $26,350. So this is an increase, obviously. On page 5 of your handout, I have a breakout of the cost of this contract. It's coming to you because we are submitting a 5-year award because we were able to negotiate the best annual cost by making it a 5-year award. So in year 1, the cost is $140,560, and that includes $74,650 for the migration of the data from the current system to the new system, the initial training, all the supports related to that change, new configuration. That $74,000 we are able to pay for through a HUD planning grant, which leaves a balance for the first year of operating of $66,000. So theoretically, $26,000 of that is already approved through the levy. So that's really new money in 2020 of about $40,000. Then years 2, 3, 4, and 5, in 2019, the Office of Home Services submitted an application for HMIS in our COC application, and we are very hopeful that that will be funded. And if that's funded, then going forward, of the $99,000 per year cost, we would be able to cover 73% of that from the grant, and just continue to utilize the $26,350 from the levy, which has been ongoing. You're prohibited from supplanting local funds with federal funds, so it's not like we can just shift the entire cost into the grant.
So, Madam Chair, Director, are you saying that none of the 76,000 or 74,650 in year 1 and the 72,650 per year in years 2, 3, 4, and 5 as HUD grant money, none of this has been approved yet, is that correct?
To the chair, to Councilman Miller, the 74,650 is approved, and we have it, under, it's appropriated.
So year 1 is approved, but
Right.
but years 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the grant award have not been approved yet. Is that correct?
That is correct, to the chair. Mhm.
And when do we expect to hear on that?
To the chair, to Councilman Miller, really any day. I mean, the HUD has, so the way the application is set up is there's, like tier 1 funding and then tier 2 and bonus projects. HUD announced the tier 1 funding. Our project is in the tier 2 bonus category. So we're waiting for them to make that second round of announcements.
All right, I'd like to ask one. And I may have missed this, who determines we are the manager of the HMIS system? How did we get that standing?
To the chair, so I think that it's technically determined by the Office of Homeless Services Advisory Board, designated the Office of Homeless Services to officially have that role. The Office of Homeless Services took on that role in 2003 when it became a requirement of the HUD funding, and we were a recipient, the county was a recipient at that time.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. You good, Mr. Miller? Okay, so I know you were gonna start to tell us about it, and then questions
Great.
got kind of interjected, so I don't know if I'm fully clear on it. So if you could just tell us from your perspective of,
Sure. So, to the chair, you know, on slide 8, 9, and 10 are just really what I've shared with you, that we've had the same provider for 15 years. We conducted the RFP. You know, the product has to meet the HUD standards. It has to have a high customer service rating. It has to be able to provide data analytics. 5 bidders, 3 passed phase 1 of the criteria, and BitFocus scored the highest. The deliverables are that it will configure and migrate data from the current software. It will provide training and support to staff in our community. There's over 120 licensed end users. It will be upgraded as HUD upgrades its technical requirements. We will get those for, you know, not for free, but it's included in the cost. There won't be additional costs. And they will be responsive to our technical assistance requests.
Councilwoman Stevens.
One other question. How many, is it COCs? It's been so long since I've been in that
Yes.
world. That are they providing services to?
To the chair, to Councilwoman Stevens, I don't know. What I do know is that because in Ohio, this WellSky had been the provider for all the COCs up until recently. We are the first, well, we're the second, well, we're the first COC that had been a WellSky utilizer to move away from them, and I think that Columbus is going to follow. There is a trend nationally to leave WellSky because there are, you know, I think that BitFocus has developed a product and a marketing approach and has demonstrated a kind of a customer profile that is enticing COCs away from WellSky. And HUD doesn't endorse any particular, you know, software. It's up to the community to select, as long as the software meets the HUD standards, you know. And so it's those other elements of you know, service and technical correctness that are important to communities.
So do you know how many other clients they have comparable to us?
To the chair, to Councilwoman Stevens, I don't know, although what I could do, I know that I could find out, I think. They did include some current contract references, which included Reno, Nevada, which I don't know if that's comparable or not, but
They're larger than we are.
they have more homeless than we do. But I could get you.
So if you, to the chair, if you just get us some numbers, how many communities they have, and especially into communities such as ours, over 1 million? Because the larger the community, the larger the homeless population typically.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Councilman Miller.
Director, did WellSky bid on it?
To the chair, to Councilman Miller, yes, they did.
And were they one of the 3 that made the final round?
I believe that they were.
And who was the 3rd one?
It was a group called Ecovia.
And is there a particular reason why we decided to bid this out this round, or did it just come up as a matter of course that it was time that it needed to be rebid?
To the chair, to Councilman Miller. So honestly, we have really struggled with WellSky in terms of customer service. They have struggled to meet the, HUD will come up with an upgrade, and there'll be an expectation that it will be in place by a certain date. And then, we are relying on that in order to then meet HUD's deadline for reporting. And there have been many, many times when those upgrades aren't either on time or they're on time but not functional. And so we have experienced a lot of, customer angst with this provider. So,
In your scoring, did you have a formal scoring process on this?
to the chair, Councilman Miller, yes, we did.
And did Big Focus win by a significant margin?
To the chair, through the chair to Councilman Miller, there were 3 categories of scoring. In every category, BitFocus was the highest scored. I can share the scores with you if you're interested.
Okay,
Okay.
that would be good.
All right, hearing any other questions? I take it that you're gonna need this second reading suspension?
That would be very helpful.
All right,
Okay, Madam Chair, would you like a motion?
yes, please.
I move that we approve this and forward it to council.
Second,
Moved
with
and
understanding
seconded.
it's for second reading suspension.
Yes. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Gillette, who was the first one that you said it went from WellSky to it was Metafair before? who was
MetaWare.
before?
It was Bowman Systems.
Bowman
yeah.
was
It
the
was
first one.
started by an individual, Robert Bowman, out of Shreveport, Louisiana. And
So they merged or took over? or-
then he sold Bowman to MetaWare, and then MetaWare sold to WellSky.
Are they the only ones that at that time were doing this HMIS system?
No, to the chair, in 2003, we did an RFP process, and we did have, other providers come and bid on it. I could dig out that file and see who it was, but, yeah. They were kind of in on the ground floor.
Okay, well, it just looks like that we have other organizations that are getting into this field now, so it's good, makes it competitive. All right,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Madam Clerk, I believe we voted. All in favor of moving this to the full council for second reading suspension, say aye. Aye. I knew I missed a step. So, Madam Clerk, if you could please invite our guest. Do they have a presentation in the queue?
Yes, it's
All
up,
right.
and you guys have it at your desk.
All right.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Frank Ford with Western Reserve Land Conservancy. Oh. Okay.
And Frank, can you give
Yes.
us a little background of why you're here today and
Yes.
where it all started? Thank you.
So I've been doing research for about 5 years on the impact of the foreclosure crisis and how the county is recovering from it, and particularly with a focus on neighborhoods and communities and suburbs that are heavily African American because they were impacted. They seem to be targeted for subprime and predatory loans. And so I noticed that nobody seemed to be tracking that. And I decided I would start doing that. And so what you're going to see is some research that some of you actually may have seen an earlier version of this in September in a more informal setting. This is the first time I'm presenting it here to a council committee. There's also something new since September that I had not developed yet, and that's on December 22nd, just before Christmas, I finished an analysis of home mortgage lending in Cleveland neighborhoods and suburbs in the county. And so if there's time, I might go through that as well. But what I'll do is I'll just do the basic part here for 10 minutes or so, and you can tell me if you think there's time for me to go further. Okay.
You have an hour and 5 minutes.
Oh, my God. You're not joking?
No, I'm
Oh, I could fill the time. Well, then I'm less concerned. All right. And you do have this, of course. I was assuming there were more slides here than we'd have time to go through, and of course, if there are, then you can see them, and you're welcome to contact me with any questions. The first thing is some good news. Mortgage foreclosures, which drove this crisis, are significantly down. They're actually down to the point where they're back to 1995 levels. And most people would say that between 95 and 2000 is the beginning. So what was driving this, we're back to normal. That's not really our problem. The problem, and I'm sorry about this next slide, is not, it's a little harder to digest, but I'm just going to walk you through it. The first column are the cumulative foreclosure filings between 06 and 18. And then the next column are the residential parcels in the geographies that are listed there. So then the next one after that is what is the percent of, or the concentration of those filings to the parcels, the residential parcels. And as you can see, the east side of Cleveland is 41%, east inner suburbs 35%. I just need to adjust this slightly. And then as you go, it just descends from there. If you want to jump over to the far right, you'll see that I have the percent of African American population, which is 80% on the east side, 52% on the east inner suburbs, and then it descends from there. The two things that are interesting are the next three columns, really. The median home sale price in 06, then the median sale price as of just last December, December of 18, and then what represents the difference or the loss of value. And this is where you can really see graphically or very easily that the impact of having high foreclosures, concentrated foreclosures on east side of Cleveland, the east inner suburbs, predominantly African-American neighborhoods, is pretty strong. It's a loss of value on the east side of Cleveland of $52,000 median sale price, $42,000 in the east inner suburbs. I just want to say one thing that I don't have a slide for this, but it's worth just talking about for just a minute. We've all, I'm sure, heard the term redlining, and it's associated with the lending industry denying mortgage loans to predominantly African-American communities, decades of this. And that's because they denied loans with the perception that black communities are a high risk, and we don't want to make loans there. I'm oversimplifying this, but I think that shifted between 95 and 2000 when some lenders, and they seem to be starting in California, some mortgage brokers got the idea that, well, wait a minute, instead of denying them loans, what if we still perceive them as a high risk, but we just charge them more interest? And that's where we get the introduction of subprime and predatory lending. The idea of predatory means that they're actually preying on communities with the idea that if we can perceive them as a high risk, we now have the justification to actually charge higher interest. We're going to make more money. Of course, that led to a huge problem when these loans were then sold to Wall Street firms on the secondary market, and nobody was really paying attention, and it all fell apart, and we had the disaster. But I think it's worth noting, how did we get into this in the first place? I'm going to jump to the next one. So this is looking at...
Before you jump,
oh,
I
I'm
have
sorry.
a question.
Okay. Yes.
Going back to the previous slide.
Yes.
Is this in constant dollars, or are these prices adjusted for inflation?
They're not adjusted. They are the prices at that time.
So that means that for most of them, they haven't even recouped the prices that they were selling for in 2006.
That's a good point.
And because they're not adjusted for inflation, the gap is even larger.
I think that's fair to say, and I haven't done the calculation. I guess I can add that to my to-do list of things that I probably need to do. Thank you. Okay. Looking at the same regional geographies, outer suburbs, west inner suburbs, east inner suburbs, west side of Cleveland, and east side of Cleveland, portrayed here on this chart. The dotted lines, by the way, the top dotted line is Cuyahoga overall, the bottom dotted line is Cleveland overall. And what you can see is that there's a peak year for all regions, it's around 05, 06, and then there is a decline responding to the foreclosure crisis, and there's a recovery underway. The difference is it's just vastly different depending on where you're standing. The outer suburbs have recovered really almost completely, if not completely, pretty much the same for the west inner suburbs. Cuyahoga County, 92%. Again, with the understanding of Councilman Miller, what you just raised, east inner suburbs is 64%, west side of Cleveland, 79%, Cleveland at 50%, and then, of course, the east side of Cleveland is really the one that's struggling the most at 34%. And I'm going to continue. This is something similar to what I did earlier, showing the correlation between a large number of foreclosures and the reduction in market value. What this one shows is adding the quantity of blight if it's measured. So starting from the far left in 2000, the percent of African American population on the west side was 12%, east side 78%. If you jump forward all the way to the right, you can see that it's changed, but it hasn't changed dramatically. We still have predominantly highest percentage of African Americans on the east side versus the west side. The median home sale price in 05 was $89,000 on the west side, $80,000 on the east side. That's not that far apart. What changed then is if you start to see the foreclosure filings, that I know 07 was the peak year. In the west side, there were 1,800. On the east side, there was 2.5, 3 times as many, 4,300. And then when you get to 2015, this is where Western Reserve Land Conservancy did a door-to-door survey of every property in the city of Cleveland. We found that the properties were rated demolition likely in 2015 on the west side was only 568. The east side was a dramatically higher number at 4,600. And then jumping, sorry.
Councilwoman Brown, when you finish that point, has
Yes.
a question.
No, I was curious about the percentage relative to the population in 2000. That adds up to 90. So where's the other?
You know, it's interesting because last night as I was reviewing this, I saw that and realized, okay, somebody can interpret this that way. What I'm portraying is it's sort of a coincidence that on the far right, 19 and 81 do total 100.
Okay.
And on the left side, 12 and 78 do not. So what I'm really showing here is not so much where are all African Americans, but what is the percent of African American population in that particular geography.
Okay.
I
think I understand.
I probably need to edit this a little.
It does.
Because I thought of the very same thing about 24 hours ago, and I thought, I wonder if I'm going to get asked that question. Of course, I was.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for your encouraging me. I need to clean this up a little bit. But the same, what we see here is similar to the other slide, that the dramatic change in home sale price and the percent of market recovery is it's just sort of it stands out to me that it's not just that there were higher foreclosure filings, it's also the result of those foreclosures, the abandonment and the blight undermining the housing market on the east side versus the west side. And of course, the communities with higher African American population are really struggling with this more. This is just isolating just the east side of Cleveland, 10 neighborhoods on the east side of Cleveland. And when you look at it with that isolation, then it's even more dramatic that you see the drop in home sale prices. And now the good news is that everything is on its way up. It's just a question of how fast it can recover. And I think this is where we get to the issue of the residual blight that is left in some communities versus others. That's really the probably the main obstacle to overcome to help some communities recover. One more thing I do want to jump to, because I was at a meeting a few months ago. Now it's probably been about 6 months, where I was presenting something like this, and somebody said, "Well, I don't understand. How could the median price in Glenville be only $21,000 when homes are selling there for $200,000?" My answer, I said, "Well, I'm going to look into that." But my guess was that the $200,000 homes are a very small niche in the shadow of Case Western. And so when I did the research, this is the next slide, what I found that in Glenville, there were 491 arm's length sales, result in producing that median of 21,000. And what you see there is that there was one sale at 300,000. There were 4 in the 200 to 299 range. There were 7 in the 100 to 199 range. Those were the high-end sales. But then you see that the vast majority of the sales are at the 57% or under 25,000. So and I looked some of these individual properties up, and they are a block away from University Circle. They are in Ashbury. It's really, it would be inaccurate to somehow say about the Glenville neighborhood that, well, we've got homes selling for $200,000. That's true, but the bulk of the Glenville neighborhood is still struggling to recover. I'm not in any way disparaging the idea of higher market sales, but I just think it's important to pay attention to the rest of the neighborhood. And one more thing now, I've also been asked, well, what about the Slavic Village Recovery Project? And aren't they selling homes there? And isn't that successful? And the answer is yes. But here's some bulleted things. I took a close look at this. So there were 52 vacant homes acquired on 28 target streets in Slavic Village. That's about a quarter of the neighborhood since they started the program in June of 13. The 49 of those 52 homes were sold for between $48,000 and $84,000, which is very good. The median sale price was $67,000, also very good, given that the Slavic Village median is only $27,500. But here's the thing. On those 28 streets, they did 310 demolitions in that same period. The ratio of blight to elimination to renovation is 6-1. And I have a graphic depiction of this that you can see that. So this is, I guess what I'm saying is that I think the Slavic Village Recovery Project was an excellent project, but we just shouldn't forget that what they had to do to make that successful was that to get those 49 homes to be successful, they had to remove 310 blighted homes in close proximity to make those 49 marketable and attractive to people. One more slide on just showing.
Mr. Ford.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Move forward.
Yes.
Yeah, just
Want me to go
since that's-
back?
Yes, well,
Yes.
just since that's my area, and I got their concept. They said, well, let's remove the blight. No one
Right.
wants a new home
Yeah.
next to blight. So they were forced to take down 6 in order to build 1.
Right.
My question, though, is do you see Slavic Village now growing with what they've done? Will those other 6 vacant spots potentially become places where someone will build a home?
I think in so the 28 streets where they did the project, where they targeted, it's approximately a quarter of the neighborhood. I think we will not need to see that ratio of blight removal in that quarter. The question is, the other 3/4 of the neighborhood, though, that may still not have had that benefit of that kind of targeted approach. That's a question. I'm not sure that I can say for certain, but it's a question that I raise in this research. Is it possible now for the Slavic Village Recovery Project to simply jump to the other 3 parts of the other 3/4 of the neighborhood without having those blight removal resources? Similar question would be, could you take the Slavic Village Recovery model and simply move it over to St. Clair without doing that? And I guess I would say I think that's doubtful without having these kind of resources. But in the quarter of the neighborhood, the 28 streets where they did do it, I don't think we're going to need to see that level of blight removal now, because they've done the hard work to make that possible. So.
And elaborate, can this be replicated in other areas?
Absolutely.
Do
I think
other areas have the resources that given the Slavic
Yeah.
Village?
I think that there's no question that, well, with how much certainty am I saying this? I said I believe that the Slavic Village Recovery Project is a good project, was well-run. I believe that it could be replicated in other neighborhoods, but I also believe that it would probably require the kind of support, blight removal resources to make that possible. A true expert on this might be Councilman Brancatelli. It'd be interesting to see if he would agree with me. I think he probably would, but he'd be a good resource for you to ask that same question.
Councilwoman Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, just a point of clarification for myself, that I want to be clear on this. The 49 homes were not new builds. They were renovated from the 52 vacant.
That is correct, and I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. None of these were new construction. I don't believe any of them were.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. This last slide that I think sort of wraps up this piece is there was a working group of about a dozen people it was about a year ago, included the county land bank, included city officials, some county officials. I think Khalil Seren might have been part of this. Ken Surratt was part of it. Community development corporations were part of it, and Case Western Reserve as well. Looked at what is the universe of vacant homes at that time, what is likely to require demolition, and then where are we at with the resources we have to address that, and what's going to happen when we run out. So the big numbers were approximately 13,000 vacant homes, and it would certainly not be true to say, well, all vacant homes need to be demolished. That is not true. About 5,600 of those were likely to be demolition candidates. And then the first column is the 1 to 3 family homes requiring demolition, the 5,600, broken out by some specific geographies, the east side of Cleveland, the west side, East Cleveland in particular, and then the balance of the suburbs. The second column is with the money that is currently available. That's from the County Demolition Fund. It's the City of Cleveland's demolition funds, and the third was the money that the Land Bank has from the Hardest Hit Fund. That with those funds, almost 2,300 of the 5,600 can be addressed, but at some point in 2020, and I'm not sure anybody knows exactly when this is going to happen, but at some point during 2020, those 3 funds will become depleted, with the exception that if Mayor Jackson does put some more money back in. But the point is, you can see that we're not really out of this yet. This is not like, I hate to think of the image of the banner on the battleship, mission accomplished. We're not quite there yet, particularly in the east side of Cleveland. Now, I will say that the inner ring suburbs, there's significant improvement there, and I think by most accounts, including people I've talked to with inner ring suburbs, they acknowledge that they are well on their way, further on their way, certainly than the east side of Cleveland. I forgot, I put in this slide for the east inner suburbs, just if you wanted to see it. These are 9 east inner suburbs, and of course, there's a wide range of recovery. Shaker Heights is at the top, University Heights and Cleveland Heights, and then towards the bottom, of course, East Cleveland, Maple Heights, Warrensville, and Garfield and Euclid. But even Maple Heights, Warrensville, Garfield, and Euclid are relatively recovering much better than those 10 east side of Cleveland neighborhoods we just looked at, because you see the percent of recovery there is in the 50-60% range, whereas most of the east side neighborhoods of Cleveland were in the 25-30% range. Just want to shift to what's the impact of tax delinquency. Tax delinquency has gone up in the last 10 years quite a bit, but the good news is, and it's, you can see it in the very last shift between 2018 and 2019. For the first time in 10 years, the residential property tax delinquency in Cuyahoga County is coming down. And I believe that is attributable to a couple things, and really the county should be credited with this. One is the investments the county has made in restarting something that, if you've been around for a while, you might remember something called the fishbowl. Back when the county administration was in the old building and there was the glass, all the foreclosure counseling or the tax, it was foreclosure counselors behind this glass wall, and so it was called the fishbowl. That was eliminated after Executive Fitzgerald came in, and it's been brought back at the suggestion of housing advocates. And so I give credit to Executive Budish for bringing this back. And in particular, he's assigned somebody who's done an incredible job with this, Mike Sweeney, who's been with the county treasury for many years. The second thing that was recommended is, since we had this great infrastructure that the county was investing in for mortgage foreclosure counseling, and since mortgage foreclosures are down, why not take that infrastructure and aim it at the tax delinquency problem? And so the county's done that as well with some very good results. So I think we will see, actually, I guess I could have gone to this next slide because it's saying what I just said. I think you're going to see, is there wood here I can knock on? I was just thinking, do I want to say? I was thinking that you're going to see a further decrease in residential tax delinquency because the right things are being done to reach out to people before they get too deep in delinquency to help them get on payment plans. But of course, now here, looking where is the delinquency? Well, it's east side of Cleveland and east inner suburbs is where the problem, and that's consistent with you know, as a residual effect of the foreclosure crisis. The next slide I have is showing the same thing, but instead of being the number of parcels delinquent, it's the dollars delinquent. This really takes me to where I was going to stop. If you have more time, I could show you. I've done some interesting research on home mortgage lending, and this is new that very few people have seen it because I just did it right a couple days before Christmas. Do you want me to proceed? Okay. So what prompted me to, hold on a second. What prompted me to take a closer look at home mortgage lending were a couple things. One was that 2 years ago, just somewhat by coincidence, 3 major financial institutions that are based in Ohio entered into community benefits agreements, which were loosely supervised by federal regulatory agencies because they weren't meeting the credit needs of underserved communities, in particular African American communities. And those are multi-year agreements. They're 4 or 5 years. KeyBank is one of them. Fifth Third is another, and Huntington is the third. And that was one reason I wanted to take a closer look. The second reason was, as I think many of you know, the county's contract with KeyBank for banking services ended December 31. It was extended for 3 more months till March 31. The county will have to decide what to do with that. And so I wanted to take a close look at, there were 6 banks that were bidding to be depositories and provide banking services. So the research I've done is to look at that. But first of all, I want to just give you a sense of what's the landscape here. Looking again at home sales 2018 and comparing that to our loans being made where home sales are happening. And the red bars are the 1 to 3 family arm's length sales in the same 5 geographies I was looking at before. The green bars are the 1 to 4 family loans made. Now, by the way, if you're wondering, 1 to 3 is 1 to 3 to 1 to 4 apples to oranges. It really isn't, because 99% of all home sales are 1 and 2 family. There's only a statistically insignificant number of sales that might be on a 4 family, even a 3 family. So these are really good things to compare. And what you see is that as you move from the outer suburbs to the west inner and finally get to the east side of Cleveland, the east side of Cleveland had 3,400 arm's length sales, and only 400 loans were made associated with those sales, so only 13%, compared to way on the other end, the outer suburbs, 83% of all the transactions had a mortgage loan associated with them. So what's the possible explanation? There are several here. Probably a big one is that with the low prices for many of these sales, a home could go for $15,000, $20,000. There are investors who will pay cash. They will either pay cash or they will borrow from a hard money lender. They don't bother going to a bank. And so now you have home buyers and realtors trying to help them are competing with these sometimes out-of-state investors, sometimes they're local. But that's a major issue. The other issues here that I've listed, and first one is, it's only human nature. Loan officers who get paid by commission, if they have a choice to do a $30,000 home in Glenville or $50,000 versus, am I going to spend time on a house out in Moreland Hills? They're going to move and be attracted to those sales where they can make more money. The second thing is that lenders are often reluctant to make loans below $50,000 for a reason that isn't exactly their fault. And that is that the federal government, a number of years ago, decided because of the prevalence of predatory and subprime lending with high interest rates that I mentioned earlier, the federal government decided to penalize lenders who were engaging in what were called high-cost loans. What ended up happening was an unintended consequence of that now if you have say a $40,000 house, it's in decent condition, it's in the east side of Cleveland, but the fees associated with that $40,000 transaction for the appraisal and other things are high enough. They're not ridiculously high, they're just high enough that when you look at them in proportion, it makes that $40,000 transaction look like a high-cost loan through the lens that the federal government is using. So a lot of lenders shy away from them for that reason. A third bullet I have here is, of course, yes. I'm sorry.
Councilwoman Brown.
Thank you. On that point, because one of the issues that I struggle with is making loans to in the communities that have been impacted by this, not just for purchases, but when we go back to the 6-to-1 analogy, just renovations.
Yes.
Does that same rule apply?
I think it does, that whether somebody's applying for a simple purchase loan or a purchase with rehab funds to be associated with that, I really, for
What
almost...
about a homeowner who's just looking to maintain their property value? Because I think we run into that in communities of color as well, where they aren't afforded the same opportunity. So is that an obstacle or
Yes.
an unintended consequence?
And I'm actually going to show you some evidence of that when it comes to home repair loans that people are struggling to get those as well. So yeah, I'm going to show you. I do have more to show you.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. So specifically looking at race and lending, here's just a simple presentation of that, looking at both home improvement and home purchase. The black rejection rate is in red, the white rejection rate is in blue. Again, this is just a very simple look, but the rejection frequency is much greater. A 2-to-1 ratio for home improvement, that blacks are rejected more than whites. For home improvement, for home purchase, it's about 2. It's a little more than 2-to-1. And then what I did is I took this a step further and then decided what if I were to break down the same data and look at it by income. So as you can see here, if I took just high income whites and blacks, those who are making, and this is the income levels based on, I think it's from HUD, if I'm not mistaken. I have a citation down at the bottom. I know it's the Code of Federal Regulations. It's not an income breakdown that I came up with. It's something that is pretty standard in the housing field. The high income is $76,000 or more, and so on. And let me show you what happens. When I look at those 4 income groups, left to right, and I look at the black percent of rejection, which is in red, and the white percent that is in blue, you see, of course, there's the general descending denial as you get to the higher income. But what's interesting, and I've shown it with these 2 arrows, that if you are a high-income black borrower, you're likely to be more rejected than even the moderate and middle-income white borrowers, which I think is a pretty striking finding. Although I know that the research I've done, by the way, it's not like I made this up completely on my own. I modeled this after research that people have been doing for at least 10 years in other parts of the country. I just hadn't seen anybody do it here, and so I thought it needed to be done here. In regard to home repair, I'm going to go just to give you a sense of, based on the surveys that the Western Reserve Land Conservancy did in 2015 of the city of Cleveland, we found there was a difference between the east side and the west side. The east side had over 12,000, almost 13,000 properties that were rated C, and I should back up a step and explain something. We rated the properties A, B, C, D, or F. A's and B's were properties that did not require much repair, if any. D and F properties were properties that required much more repair than a simple $10,000, $20,000 home repair loan would. Those are properties that could be demolition or they would need major renovation. The C properties are the ones that would be the most likely candidates for a typical home repair loan of $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And there you can see there's clearly a great need for it on the east side of Cleveland. Next slide shows you, though, this goes back to Councilman Brown, your question. What I've shown here in the blue bar is the percent of loans, home repair loans that were made by the 5 geographies I've been looking at. The beige, or I'm not sure what that color is, bars are the percent of African American population. So you see a trend that as you move from the outer suburbs to the east side of Cleveland, as you move from the higher predominantly white neighborhoods to the more predominantly African American neighborhoods, communities, there's a downward movement in the percent of loans made, as there is an upward movement in the percent of African American population.
Mr. Ford,
yes.
Councilwoman Stevens also has something on that.
I'm sorry.
So if we go back to the last slide.
Sure.
We see that there are 12,000 and some change properties on the east side in need of renovation, and only 5,000 on the west side.
Yes.
Are there more properties on the west side,
Uh,
or they're the same amount? Or what's the
that's a
density
good-
of housing units? Because we need to also understand if there's a smaller number of
Yeah.
units on the west side, it is easier to handle the improvements or control the quality of them.
You're right. I should have come armed with that data. I do not believe that there is such a major difference in the number of residential structures and parcels on the west side versus the east side that would account for this.
Oh,
But
I don't think that's a significant factor. It's just one factor.
I think I would agree with you. You've just added something else to my to-do list. I think I need to be able to answer that. My belief, based on the other research I've already presented, is that this is more attributable to the same factors I've already talked about: far less targeted predatory lending, far less foreclosure, abandonment, and blight, that there's. I don't show it here, but I do know that the same data showed that the number of D and F properties, number and percent, was far less on the west side than also on the east side.
No, anecdotally, I know that personally.
I know you do, yes.
So the question is, are there fewer number of housing units?
And I will look into that, and I will send something back through email to members of the committee, because you've got my attention. I actually want to be able to report on that accurately.
I should have good questions for you.
Yeah, well, thank you. So now, this is where I shift to the individual lender activity that I looked at, and actually, I forgot that I had a slide here. This is the 3 banks with community benefits agreements, what the amount of those agreements are, and the approximate time period. The Fifth Third actually goes only through this next year. KeyBank and Huntington go through 2 more years. And then there are the 6 banks that bid on the county contract. So what I've done, this is not an easy thing to, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is just something to let you know what I've done for both home purchase and home repair. I have separate tables that then look at I have, this is Cuyahoga County home purchase, and I have the top 15 lenders who made loans in Cuyahoga. I'm just going to quickly show you something. Here's the city of Cleveland, the same top 15 are not necessarily the same. Here's the east side of Cleveland, top 15, and here's the east inner suburbs. Now, one observation that does stand out, and it surprised me, I did not have any previous knowledge of Huntington. I was, if you go back through these, you'll see Huntington is near the top on all four of those countywide. And then what I did is then I looked at the 3 lenders with the community benefits agreements, and I looked over a 3-year period, which encompasses both the year before they entered into these agreements and the 2 years they've been in these agreements. And what we see is that Huntington significantly, this is at the Cuyahoga level, Huntington is significantly increasing their home purchase lending. Fifth Third is declining some. KeyBank was very low respective to the other two, but KeyBank is also improving, which is important to note. I'm going to jump to the next one is just City of Cleveland. It's pretty much the same pattern. Huntington is dramatically increasing.
We have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So before you leave this,
Yes.
we saw in one slide ago
Yeah.
that Key Bank and Huntington Bank have the same amount of their community agreements.
Dollars.
Are $16 billion approximately.
Yes.
Why are they performing? Why is there such a wide gap in their performance?
You know, I don't know that I
When
can.
we're looking at the same market,
I
the
agree.
same people, they should be they should be closer to each other. Instead, we see one who's a primary contender for our sole business.
Right.
I agree.
That's 1/3 of the other guys.
I don't know that I
happy
can
about that.
say that I
I
know
don't know about
the.
y'all.
I don't know all the answers to that. I would say that your observation is in sync with observations of housing advocates and community development advocates over the last couple of years
What they doing with our money
who've
right now?
who've raised this concern that KeyBank being one of the major depository institutions, I do have a slide actually showing their deposits and the money they're reloaning. There have been major concerns about KeyBank, and there's been some push challenges to KeyBank. So I'm acknowledging though, because I do believe in giving credit when somebody is improving, and there is an improvement. But yes, I hear you. I hear you.
Can I just add to that, Madam Chair?
Yes.
One is good to see the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, we felt it. I felt it. You know, just being a resident in the
Sure.
neighborhood, everything you see, it's good to see the numbers
Yeah.
because again, you live it. As far as the banks, that's certainly been a concern of everyone on this council, and our deposit contracts with the banks, master contracts are coming up before the end of
Right.
March. You've already said it ends, so we are in negotiation with them, and we expect better. So we certainly will be seeing that, and this body will be dealing with that legislation in the coming days, literally.
If there's one thing, it's not a slide, but since we're talking about this, I will say I think it was in October, another working group of housing and community development advocates came up with a set of recommendations to the county. And in fact, now that I think of it, Councilman Jones, I think you and Councilman Miller got a presentation of that, and simultaneously Treasurer Murray and I forget who else got the same presentation. I believe, and I can't say this with 100% certainty, but I believe that the county administration has taken those recommendations and attempted to use them as a roadmap for their negotiations with KeyBank. What the outcome of that is, will be yet to be seen. But I do think it's a good sign that perhaps for the first time that I know of, probably not since when Mayor White was mayor of Cleveland, that a government entity actually attempted to incorporate those kind of recommendations into its negotiation. So that's a good sign, but we'll have to see what is the outcome of that, and you will probably see it before I do, because you're probably...
And I've had those conversations
Yeah.
with the administration, and
Right.
everything you and Jay you shared with
Yeah.
us certainly it was in our minds and in our conversations.
Right.
My conversations with the administration, and as you said, Chris Murray, they negotiated with the banks. Those guys, and again, it will become public
Right.
in a few days of just what they have agreed to.
And I'm looking forward to seeing it myself. I'm going to just go through these. There's a similar pattern for Cuyahoga, Cleveland, east side of Cleveland. Well, east side of Cleveland's a little bit. Well, of course, when you get to lower numbers for all of them, although Huntington's the one that does stand out for starting at 48 and went up to 62. Both Key and Fifth Third are increasing, but we're talking about very low numbers on the east side of Cleveland. If I jump to the east inner suburbs, the numbers go up some. And of course, Huntington, again, I have to say that as I said earlier, I didn't know anything about Huntington. I've not really worked with them. I've never looked at them individually. I was pretty impressed to see the dramatic improvement that they made over a 24-month, two-year period, or over 3 years here. And then this is the same thing. I'm looking at home repair loans. I have the same tables, which there's a lot of detail there. Well, one thing worth noting is KeyBank. Now, this is where KeyBank actually has excelled. KeyBank, in virtually every geography, has been the top lender for home repair. And City of Cleveland, the same. East side of Cleveland, well, actually they went down a step to Huntington there. The easiest way to look at this is do these same charts again. If you look at these same three lenders, same 3-year period, home repair loans, what happened? Key was way at the top above everybody else, 556 home repair loans to Huntington's 94, Fifth Third's 54. Key slightly dropped overall in the 3-year period. Huntington, again, dramatically, I guess that's almost a 5-fold increase from 94 to almost 500 loans. Fifth Third increasing some. Then we look at just the city of Cleveland. We have Key had slightly gone down with the county. Now they've sort of dramatically come down for their home repair loans in the city of Cleveland to where Huntington is now, they're almost at the same level in the city of Cleveland. The numbers for Fifth Third are fairly low. East side of Cleveland, now you've got KeyBank dropping to the point where they're dropping lower than Huntington. Again, the numbers for Fifth Third are very low. East inner suburbs, Key is dropping still, but not quite as dramatically as on the east side of Cleveland. But again, you've got Huntington dramatically increasing with virtually every geography in terms of home repair lending. I think one of the, then I started to look at, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back, yes.
Councilman Jones?
On those, can you give us a sense of the need? 93 and 75 and 15, but there were 400,000 people in the city of Cleveland?
Yes,
On the
and
east side, what would you describe as the universe of need in comparison to what these three banks have touched on?
yeah, I think that the need is far greater. They are not, I think there's room for improvement for everybody. Looking at Huntington, it's hard to say, gee, you're not doing enough when they've dramatically increased. But I'd say overall, the lending industry is not meeting the home repair needs of our communities, and particularly the east side and the east inner suburbs.
Next question. Have you made a similar study for the local credit unions in the community that do home mortgage lending?
I have not. I believe that it could be done because I'm pretty sure that there's an indicator in this federal data for credit unions separately. So I could do that. If I can, I'm going to make a pitch for something here, which I didn't come plan to do this, but the work that I did to produce this was 140 hours between October 1 and December 31. It was actually, nobody paid for it. Jim Rackauckus said, Frank, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. I would really love it if somebody would help pay for this, because it's hard to fit this in on top of everything else that I do. And in fact, it would give me the opportunity to maybe hire some interns or whatever. So I'm making a shameless pitch for if it's possible. I think this is important work that should be done whether I do it or...
You know, I like to cut to the chase.
Yes.
What are you asking for? Are you asking for $5? Or are you
Oh.
asking for $25?
Oh, it would be neither 5 nor 25. I'd have to think about what was the 140 hours of work worth. And the truth is, unfortunately, I'm someone who's so accustomed to doing things because I just think it needs to get done.
Frank, I understand
Yeah.
your pitch, and
Yeah.
I appreciate your pitch, but we don't want other people coming up
thank
here
you.
and thinking
No,
they
no.
can pitch.
And I understand.
So we'll talk to you after about the process.
Right.
Councilman Miller is the finance chair. He can
Sure.
tell you
Yes.
how you would connect with Border Controls. And
Yes. I won't
what we can
spend
do.
I mean, another minute.
I love it, but I don't want to be pitched all
Yeah.
the time. With
And for the record, the answer is
Yeah.
no across to all of those in radio
Yeah.
land. The answer, Frank Ford, is no.
Yeah, no,
We
I
can
hear
talk
you,
offline.
and I actually, believe me, I didn't come today even thinking that I only thought of it in terms of, your ask was, could I add something to the research I've already done? Oh,
Of your
okay.
free research.
Yeah,
So you
right,
made a very
right.
good point
Yes.
that you have done this on your
Yep.
own, and we will talk with you offline about it. Please continue.
Sure. So in terms of the 50,000, loans at 50,000 or less, and I will say, I believe that the Land Bank, with their program that they've just engaged with the county, I think they're defining low-value loans as 75,000 or less. And there is no magic to this. I could have probably chosen 75. The reason I chose 50 is because in the conversations that have percolated over the last year and a half on this, people tend to use 50,000. But I think it'd be just as reasonable to say we could have used 75. But anyway, what I did with the same 4 geographies, I rated the top 15 banks who made loans. This is Cuyahoga County. And then I did City of Cleveland. Then I did East Side of Cleveland, and I did East Inner Suburbs. Interestingly enough, once again, Huntington rises to the top. When you look at the 3 banks, those 3 banks over the 3-year period, what I've noticed about this is that there's no dramatic change for any of the 3, at least not observable, because whether you're looking at Cuyahoga County, City of Cleveland, East Side, or Eastern Suburbs, I mean, the numbers are very low. This isn't, I would say, next to the need for home repair lending, I would say there's a pretty significant need to address this issue of properties selling in the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 range, or $60,000, and the lending industry not really having a way to respond to that. Again, at least I would attribute that Huntington seems to be doing amongst those 3 banks. And of course, going back to looking at the top banks, so if I look at the top 15, Huntington in all 4 geographies is also, but overall, this is an unmet need that's really still needs to be addressed. And I think it's good that the County Land Bank, in their housing program that they proposed, is proposing to address this. One of my last things I look at is, what about low to moderate income borrowers, regardless of where they are?
Well, Frank is actually the Cuyahoga County's ordinance plan, and they're going to administer.
I should have attributed that correctly to this
want
legislative
the
body.
people to-
Thank you. Low to moderate income borrowers defined as 80% of median Cuyahoga income below $51,000, regardless of where they are. The top 15 are, again, Huntington, although what you have in here is some other lenders creep in, Cross Country Mortgage, Howard Hanna, Lendus. I'm not even sure. A lot of these are smaller mortgage companies that are making loans. Looking at the three lenders with the community benefits agreements over the 3-year period, it's pretty much the same pattern. Huntington is increasing, Fifth Third is declining somewhat, and KeyBank, although the numbers are low, they are increasing. I think I am getting close to the end here. The other thing that I know people have asked about, and it came up earlier in this discussion, was what about dollars that banks are holding from our communities? What are they reloaning back to those communities? What percent? So I took a look at this, and so this is deposits that the top depositors have as of June 30, 2018, and then it's looking at the loans that were made in 2018. And so what I have is the pink, or whatever shading that is, that's how I've sorted the data. I sorted it by the volume of deposits, and that looks like 15 million, but it's really 15 billion because you have to add 3 zeros there. And then I look at the market share that bank has of the deposits. And of course, we see KeyBank has 28% of deposits, PNC 15%, and so on. And then I look at what were the dollars they loaned back in Cuyahoga County, and then what was the percent of the deposits loaned, the percent of, what was the percent of the deposits that were reloaned back into the community? This is where it's pretty striking that even though KeyBank is way at the top, they are close to the bottom. New York Community Bank is the only one of the top 15 that's lower. Now, I will say something in KeyBank's defense, which I don't always do, but I believe in being fair. What KeyBank has pointed out to me, and this was at an earlier presentation of similar data, they said, well, we have all of our corporate deposits here in our headquarter bank. And that's why you see our deposits are so high and the ratio to loans is low. I think the problem with that assertion, though, is that everything else we've just looked at does suggest that Key is not relatively on the same page with the other major banks. So while the percentages might be...
Mr. Ford, we're
Yes.
going to go to Councilwoman Stevens.
Yes.
So even if 50% of their current $15 million in deposits were corporate deposits, that would put them on par with Citizens, Huntington, and Third Federal.
Right.
And the reality is they haven't performed as well as those banks.
That is correct. Right. So I think what it suggests is that if the county, and I know there are reasons why the county administration would want to stay with the bank that they've had banking services with. I understand that it would be a major change to unravel all the infrastructure for deposits and payroll and everything. But I do think this information gives you the ammunition and the right to raise some heavy questions about what you would expect them to do. And again, we may see that the proposed contract has good things in it. I had only one more thing I took a look at, and this was something that I don't believe anybody had ever done before, and I just got an idea for it. I thought, well, what about not just what are they lending, but what about when these banks take property back after foreclosure? How are they addressing that property? Are they being good stewards of that property? So I looked at, since 2013, approximately 6-year period, I looked at the top banks, or actually not just banks, I looked at the top parties that are defendants in housing court for prosecutions from 2013 to 2019. And these are defendants who had 10 or more cases. And what really jumped out was U.S. Bank. And I have heard people anecdotally raise complaints from community development corporations in suburbs saying that U.S. Bank is not, does not necessarily take care of their property.
Yeah, where's Capital One at?
I don't see them, so they could be on the list, they could be somewhere lower, and I do have, of course, the full list. I couldn't present it all on one page. But I thought this was just an interesting thing to just add to an analysis that it's worth looking not just what is a bank's role in making loans, but what's their role in being stewards of property after they take it back. So I actually am finished. We managed to, I can't believe, you let me go through this whole thing. I'm really appreciative. Thank you.
We thank you. We thank
Sure.
you. I just wanted to thank you again, Frank, for coming out, and Councilman Westbrook. This is HHS committee, and housing is so correlated to health. It is not even, so equity, we started out in 2012 with an equity plan with the county set, and this is just disparity. For, when you look at it in a whole and see what's been done on the west side of
Right.
Cuyahoga County versus what is still left, and we all sat here collectively voting on the demolition fund. So we know we still have work to do, and I don't want us to move forward until that at least the east side communities can
Yeah.
be brought up to standard with the west side communities.
And the money that you allocated for the demolition fund did make a difference. You can see the upward
did.
movement. It really did make a difference.
It
It's
just
that
wasn't utilized in a fair.
well, that's a reasonable thing, but I think the main thing is that the job is just not done in some places. That's really the bottom line. Thank you for the opportunity to come
I'd
here
like to
today.
make one final comment.
yeah, sure.
Again, I like the fact that you put numbers to what many of us
Yes.
feel as residents. And we didn't touch directly on East Cleveland. You certainly touched on it, but didn't go in depth. But it just makes me think back to how in the early 70s growing up, East Cleveland was the place to go. In the 60s, it was a much more diverse city. Now it's predominantly African American. And again, we would go out there for the restaurants. It was a suburb. But again, when you mentioned redlining and not being able to get loans for houses under 50 and all of that, as more renters and just the inability to get loans, all these things happen, you saw the money, the values go down, the property taxes go down, the money to the school systems were going down, and with that, you just saw the city start to go down, have challenges. And and now 50 years later, we know what it looks like with the divesting of banks and all of these things. And these are the challenges, which you've already said are happening in Maple Heights, Garfield Heights, cities that are, again, diverse, but they're battling now. Why aren't loans being made under $200,000 when the average value is $50,000? So those challenges we need to fight now to make sure, what we know happens in 50 years. If you do it in East Cleveland back in the 70s, don't let it happen now in a Maple or a Garfield today.
I agree.
Again,
Mr.
thank you.
Westbrook, you'd like to come up to the mic and say something? Thank you again for coming.
Madam Chair, my colleague Frank Ford was eager to come and present to the committee. If I may, since I left the Cleveland City Council at the beginning of 2014, I finally took Dale's, lesson, and he left about 10 years ahead of me, but they all left me behind. And when I got out, I went to work with the Western Reserve and in the Buckeye and Mount Pleasant neighborhoods. And I wanted to share a couple of very, very quick and underscore observations. One is what Councilman Purnell Jones said, is that you have felt this. You have heard it. You have seen it. And I can say as a councilman, you hear from residents long before policymakers get the data, get the facts. And frankly, if they were ranchers, horses would all be out of the barn before they said the door's not working. But Frank has a dedicated ability to dig deep and bring to light the facts. We still, there's such thing as facts, the facts that demonstrate what you feel, see, and touch. And the danger is that the neighborhoods of color, the East Side neighborhoods of Cleveland, stand at risk of being left behind, never being able to rebound even halfway. I find it hard, I'm not an economist, but I find it hard to believe that, 12 years now after the crash, that the market kind of kicks in and starts doing its thing. You can see that in the suburbs. You can see it on the west side of Cleveland. But Frank has so chillingly pointed out that the market level that East Side neighborhoods had before the crash were almost equal to the west side of Cleveland. And that crash is like literally falling off the cliff and not even come back to a 50% level. And you know it because you represent those communities, that people are still there. If they did what the banks did and packed up and walked out, those communities would be at zero. They would even be climbing back up at an incremental level. So I watched the county council adopt a housing policy program, and I think that Western Reserve has always advocated that you have to remove the blight to restore the value and to restore the public confidence in staying in communities. Doesn't mean that you're going to build a house on every vacant lot. That means there's got to be a buyer there that's going to buy that house. Maybe someday that will happen with the population trends back toward the city and so on. But the key thing is that the majority of the residents of the East Side are still there. They didn't flee. They weren't pushed out by the banks and by the foreclosures. They do have to tackle the delinquent taxes. Some of them are almost approaching the value of the properties. And if Mike Sweeney and that effort's not vigorously supported and interventions are developed, those homes are going to become abandoned homes. And I've seen it in the area where I'm working. People with $9,000, $10,000 delinquency being told the sheriff is coming next week, and they get one step ahead of the sheriff and are gone. And the tools to reclaim those properties have been impaired because of a state lawsuit about the utilization of the Board of Revision. Thank you, Board of Revision. And I guess what I want to say, I mean, it really resonated with me, the Councilwoman, Chair Lady, and Councilman Purnell Jones, who I believe is the Vice President of the County Council. You have in your hearts and in your experience the power to finish the job. But just as Frank is presenting here in a room void of news media, he's done a good job of getting attention on an occasional Sunday plain dealer that is picked up usually by CPN and then just evaporates because there's no public voice to continue the message and to drive it home. But I would plead with you to do what you know your constituents want you to do, and that is to find some resources from the county to continue the demolition fund, pull out of the remaining $50,000, the leftovers, and make sure the county land bank has that so that they can continue. They were greatly benefited by the federal hardest hit funds, which were a great thing that Obama did, but you would think, given the climate today, Obama was the worst thing that ever set foot in Washington, D.C. And yet here was $3 billion that he, as president, made sure, in conformancy with the rules and regulations the Congress had set, to target hardest hit funds for the communities hardest hit. And we knew all along that was going to complete itself in 2020. So the city, I'm going to say, has funded a total of $28 million in the last 2 years, 14 million in each year. And if the county could do just something in that range and then really target it to the hardest hit communities. You know, out of that 50,000, some went to remove derelict commercial buildings in suburbs and other things not unneeded. And maybe the county really should consider ongoing demolition support because population shifts and economics being what they are, there's never been in our country a responsibility to take down what you leave behind. So people walk away from factories, they walk away from retail property, and who's left holding the bag? You know. So at any rate, that's something I would really plead with you to give voice to and to give power to, give muscle to. And I bring it not as somebody who did serve on the west side. And we tackled these issues over there as well. And in my ward, I represented home properties that were valued at $15,000. I also represented some that were $1.5 million on the Edgewater neighborhood. But my heart and my effort was with the 15,000 ones. And you've got a terrific standing here, if I may say. And I'm so pleased, Madam Chair, that you reached out and asked that here in the Health and Human Service Committee we could bring home, if you will, how interconnected the physical health of a neighborhood is with the mental and biological health of the community. Thank you.
Again, thank both of you for coming out. This meeting is adjourned.